Leonidas knelt in the blood-soaked dirt, Persian steel buried in his back, his vision fading to red. Around him, the last 20 Spartans swung broken swords at an endless tide of enemies. 7 days. They'd held for 7 impossible days against 100,000. His lungs burned with each shallow breath. He thought of Gorgo, of the mission, of Greece awakening behind them. A shadow blocked the sun, another blade falling. But as darkness took him, Leonidas smiled. They'd bought the time. Every single one of them had paid the price. The mission was complete. Greece would remember, Greece would survive, and somewhere in that moment between life and death, between duty and sacrifice, Captain Leonidas understood the terrible truth. Some victories require everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Agoge training grounds in Sparta, but Captain Leonidas barely noticed. At 43 years old, his body bore the scars of 2 decades of warfare. A jagged line across his left shoulder from a Persian scimitar at Marathon, burn marks on his forearms from the siege of Corinth, and a limp he'd carried since taking an arrow to his thigh during the Messenian border conflicts. He stood before the bronze mirror in his modest stone dwelling, fastening the leather straps of his cuirass with practiced efficiency, each movement automatic after so many years. His wife Gorgo entered silently, her footsteps measured and deliberate. She carried his crimson cloak, the fabric heavy with Spartan tradition. "The ephors sent word," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her jaw. "The council meets at midday." Leonidas nodded, studying her reflection in the polished bronze. 20 years of marriage had taught him to read the subtle shifts in her expression. The slight downturn of her mouth, the way her fingers gripped the cloak too tightly. "You already know what they'll ask." "Thermopylae," she said simply. The word hung between them like a blade. Thermopylae, the hot gates, a narrow coastal pass where the mountains descended so steeply into the sea that barely 50 men could stand abreast. Intelligence from Athenian scouts painted a terrifying picture. King Xerxes of Persia had assembled the largest invasion force the world had ever seen. Over 100,000 soldiers, supported by a naval fleet that stretched across the horizon like a dark forest of masts and sails. 300 men, Leonidas said, more to himself than to Gorgo. The ephors will only spare 300 during the Carnea festival. Gorgo moved behind him, draping the cloak across his shoulders. Her hands lingered on the fabric. "The prophets say the omens are unfavorable. They say any king who marches to Thermopylae will not return." Leonidas turned to face her. In the harsh Mediterranean light streaming through the window, he could see the grey threading through her dark hair, the lines at the corners of her eyes. She'd been barely 20 when they married, a fierce political mind wrapped in traditional Spartan stoicism. Now, at 40, she'd buried 2 of their 3 children to fever and accident, losses that had carved something harder into her features. "If I don't go," he said carefully, "if Sparta refuses to send forces while Athens and Corinth mobilize, we lose more than a battle. We lose our honor. We lose our identity. And if you go with 300 against 100,000, we lose our lives." He said it plainly, without drama or false heroism. "But we buy time. Time for the Greek city-states to unite. Time for our allies to position their armies. Time for the fleet to engage the Persian navy." He cupped her face gently. "Sometimes the only choice is how we die, not whether we die." She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with that iron resolve he'd always admired. "Then make it count, Leonidas. Make every Spartan life worth 1,000 Persians." The council chamber echoed with heated debate when Leonidas arrived. 5 ephors, elderly men who'd earned their positions through decades of military service, sat on elevated stone seats, their faces weathered and severe. Maps of Greece sprawled across a central table, weighted down by bronze figurines representing military units. Ephor Chilon, the eldest at 72, raised his staff for silence. "Captain Leonidas, You understand the strategic situation. I do, Aepha. Xerxes moves south through Thrace and Macedonia. His forces will reach Thermopylae within the moon's cycle. If he breaks through the pass, the road to Athens lies open. After Athens falls, Sparta becomes isolated. The Carnea festival forbids full military mobilization, another Ephor added, his voice tight with frustration. Religious law binds us, but we cannot appear cowardly while other Greek states prepare to fight. Leonidas studied the map, tracing the geography with his finger. The pass at Thermopylae measured barely 15 meters at its narrowest point, squeezed between sheer cliffs and the Malian Gulf. Give me 300. I'll select them personally. Experienced warriors, men who've seen combat, soldiers who understand the reality of the mission. 300 against 100,000? Chelon's skepticism cut through the chamber. You speak of suicide, not strategy. I speak of time, Leonidas countered. The past negates their numbers. They can only attack with a fraction of their force at any given moment. Well-trained hoplites in phalanx formation, fighting in a constrained space, can hold for days. Maybe a week, long enough for the main Spartan army to finish the festival and march north, long enough for Athens to evacuate its civilians and prepare its triremes, long enough for our allies to coordinate. The ephors exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Chelon spoke. You understand, this is a one-way march, Captain. I understand my duty, Ephor. You may select your 300. Choose wisely. They die with you. That evening, Leonidas walked through Sparta's residential quarters, mentally cataloguing the men he needed. Not the youngest warriors, drunk on glory and immortality. Not the oldest, whose reactions had slowed. He needed veterans, fathers and husbands who understood sacrifice, men who'd lived enough to know what they were giving up. He stopped at the modest home of Xerxes, a 38-year-old veteran with twin sons training in the agoge. The man answered the door with suspicion that melted into understanding when he saw Leonidas's expression. Thermopylae, Xerxes asked. Thermopylae, Leonidas confirmed. Xerxes stepped outside, closing the door behind him. They stood in the cooling evening air, the sounds of domestic life. Children laughing, women talking, dogs barking, creating a symphony of normalcy around them. My sons are only 12, Xerxes said quietly. They have 6 more years of training. I know. My wife lost her first husband in Thessaly. This will destroy her. I know, Leonidas repeated. That's why I'm asking you personally, not ordering. You have the right to refuse. Xerxes was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then, when do we march? 3 days. I'll tell her tonight. As Leonidas walked away, he heard the sound of a door opening and closing, followed by muffled voices. He'd have that conversation with Gorgo soon enough. 299 more conversations like that awaited him over the next 3 days. The real war, he realized, wasn't at Thermopylae. It was here, in these quiet moments, asking men to choose duty over life, honor over survival. That was the true battle, convincing good men that some things were worth dying for. The march north took 6 days through the mountainous spine of Greece. 300 Spartans moved in tight formation, their bronze armor catching the late summer sun like a river of molten metal. Leonidas had selected carefully. Every man was over 30, battle-tested and expendable in the cruel mathematics of warfare, meaning they had brothers or grown sons to carry on their family lines. Alongside them marched 700 Thespians under Captain Demophilus, a weathered warrior of 45 with a distinctive scar bisecting his left eyebrow. 400 Thebans joined reluctantly, their city's loyalty to Greece questionable at best. Various other Greek contingents swelled their numbers to roughly 7,000, not nearly enough to face Xerxes' horde in open battle, but sufficient to hold a narrow pass if they fought with perfect discipline. Leonidas rode his horse at the column's head, though he'd walk the final approach to Thermopylae. Behind him, his second-in-command, Alpheus, kept pace. At 36, Alpheus represented the new generation of Spartan officers, educated in both warfare and philosophy, capable of understanding strategy beyond simple battlefield tactics. "The men are quiet," Alpheus observed as they navigated a rocky defile. "Even the Thespians, who usually sing on the march." "They know," Leonidas replied simply. "You can dress it in strategy and noble purpose, but they understand the mathematics. We're not reinforcements. We're a sacrifice. Does that bother you?" Leonidas considered the question as they crested a ridge, revealing the coastal plain below. The Malian Gulf sparkled blue-green in the distance, deceptively peaceful. "What bothers me is the lie we tell ourselves. We say we're buying time for Greece, and that's true, but we're also buying absolution for the ephors who wouldn't break religious law to send the full army. We're the political solution to their theological problem." Alpheus absorbed this in silence, then, "And yet you march anyway." "And yet I march anyway." Leonidas smiled grimly, because even a politically motivated sacrifice can still save lives. The why matters less than the outcome. They reached Thermopylae on the 7th day. The pass exceeded Leonidas's expectations for defensive capability. To their backs, Mount Kallidromos rose in sheer cliffs of limestone and granite, impossible to traverse with an army. To their front, the Malian Gulf's waters crashed against rocks, creating a natural barrier. The actual roadway, the only passage for Xerxes' army to continue south, narrowed to barely 12 meters at the middle gate, with ancient defensive walls already in place from previous conflicts. Leonidas immediately ordered fortification improvements. Spartan engineers, skilled in siegecraft, rebuilt crumbling sections of the Phocian wall, creating a stone barrier chest-high that would force attackers to climb or bunch together at the gates. They positioned supply dumps, designated water sources from nearby hot springs, and established rotation schedules for the watch. On the third night at Thermopylae, Persian scouts appeared on the northern ridge. Leonidas watched them through the twilight, silhouettes against the dying sun, counting Greek numbers and assessing defenses. He didn't send arrows after them. Let them report back. Let Xerxes know that Greeks held the pass. The Persian army arrived like a slow-moving storm. First came the scouts and advanced cavalry, testing the approaches. Then the infantry, regiment after regiment, unit after unit. A seemingly endless flow of humanity that took 4 full days to fully assemble on the northern plain. Leonidas stood atop the defensive wall, Alpheus beside him, watching the spectacle. "I've never seen so many people in one place," Alpheus said, his voice hollow. "It's like watching ants emerge from a disturbed nest. Just when you think they've all appeared, more come." "Count the camps," Leonidas instructed. "Each Spartan needs to understand what we face." They counted together, sections marked by different colored tents, different armor styles, different cooking fires. Medes, Persians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Indians, Scythians, Thracians. Xerxes had assembled soldiers from across his vast empire, some volunteers hungry for conquest, others conscripts who'd die far from home. "Over 100,000, Alpheus concluded. "Maybe 120,000. 100,000 is enough," Leonidas said. "Whether it's that or twice that, the mathematics remain the same. We hold them here, or we die trying." That evening, Leonidas gathered his captains, Alpheus, Dieneces, and 5 others, in a makeshift command tent behind the walls. A single oil lamp illuminated maps and tactical diagrams scratched into wax tablets. "Tomorrow they'll send emissaries," Leonidas predicted. "Xerxes always offers terms before attacking. He'll demand our surrender, promise clemency, perhaps offer gold or positions in his army." "And our response?" Dieneces asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "We refuse, politely but firmly. We're here to fight, not negotiate." He might wait us out, another captain suggested. Siege us, starve us. Leonidas shook his head. Xerxes can't afford delay. He's already lost weeks bringing his army across the Hellespont. His fleet needs to stay close to the coast, vulnerable to autumn storms. He needs to conquer Greece before winter, which means he needs this pass open within days, not months. So he'll attack directly, Alpheus concluded. He'll attack with everything he has, Leonidas agreed. Waves of infantry trying to overwhelm us through sheer numbers. Our advantage is the pass. It becomes a meat grinder that negates his numerical superiority. But we need to maintain discipline, no heroic charges, no individual glory seeking. We fight as a phalanx, shield to shield, spear to spear. We become a bronze wall. Dieneces leaned forward, his scarred hands spreading across the map. How long can we realistically hold? Leonidas met his gaze. 5 days, maybe 7 if we're lucky and well supplied. That should be enough time for Athens to evacuate its people, and for our main army to complete the Carnea festival and march north. And then? And then we've fulfilled our duty. Leonidas said it without drama, stating a simple fact. We've bought Greece the time it needs. What happens to us becomes irrelevant, measured against that achievement. The tent fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the Persian camp, thousands of voices speaking dozens of languages, cooking fires crackling, horses neighing, the percussion of an empire preparing for war. Finally, Dieneces spoke what every man was thinking. "We're not going home, are we?" "No," Leonidas confirmed. "We're not going home, but our families will have homes to return to because we stood here. Our children will grow up free because we chose duty over survival. That's not a tragedy. That's a purpose worth dying for." One by one, the captains nodded their acceptance. They'd made this choice when they agreed to march. Now they simply had to see it through. After the meeting dispersed, Alpheus lingered. "Captain, a private question. Speak. Do you believe we can actually stop them, truly? Or is this entire mission simply theatre, a performance of Spartan courage to inspire other Greeks?" Leonidas considered his answer carefully. "I believe 300 determined men in a narrow pass can hold far longer than logic suggests. I believe our training and discipline give us advantages beyond simple numbers. I believe our sacrifice will matter." He paused. "But do I believe we'll personally survive?" "No, Alpheus, I don't. And neither should you. Then we die here. But we die completing our mission. That has to be enough." Alpheus nodded slowly, then surprised Leonidas with a grim smile. "You know what Dieneces told the men earlier? A Trachinian local warned him that when the Persians fire their arrows, there are so many they'll blot out the sun. Dieneces said, 'Good, then we'll fight in the shade.'" Despite everything, Leonidas laughed, a brief, genuine sound that cut through the tension. "That's the Spartan spirit I need, humor in the face of death." As Alpheus left, Leonidas walked alone to the defensive wall, looking out at the sea of Persian campfires that stretched across the northern plain like captured stars. Somewhere in that vast army, King Xerxes sat in his royal tent, confident in his overwhelming numbers. But Xerxes didn't understand Spartans. He thought of warfare as mathematics. More soldiers equals victory. He didn't comprehend the equation that Leonidas had mastered. Properly motivated men, fighting for a purpose beyond themselves, could achieve impossible things, not miracles. Leonidas didn't believe in divine intervention or supernatural assistance. Just human will, sharpened to its finest edge and pointed at a single objective: hold the pass, buy time, save Greece. Tomorrow the emissaries would come. Tomorrow the real test would begin. The Persian herald arrived at mid-morning under a white banner, accompanied by 6 guards in ornate armor that gleamed with gold inlay. He was a tall man, likely from the Median nobility, with a carefully groomed beard and eyes that assessed the Greek defenses with professional interest. Leonidas met him at the outer gate, flanked by Alpheus and Dieneces, all three in full battle armor. "I bear words from Xerxes, king of kings, lord of Persia, ruler of the known world," the herald announced in accented but fluent Greek. "His Majesty offers you this single opportunity for survival. Surrender your weapons, swear loyalty to the Persian throne, and you will be spared. He has no desire to slaughter brave men needlessly." Leonidas let the words settle before responding. Around him, 300 Spartans stood in perfect formation, their bronze shields locked, their spears vertical. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across their faces, illuminating scars and weathered features. "Return to your king," Leonidas said clearly, his voice carrying across the pass. "Tell him to come and take them." The herald's composure cracked slightly. "You understand the odds? Over 100,000 soldiers against your, 7,000? This is not courage. This is suicide." "Then we'll die well," Leonidas replied. "Is there anything else?" The herald studied him for a long moment, perhaps looking for fear or uncertainty. Finding neither, he simply bowed slightly, a gesture of respect between warriors, and departed with his guards. Dieneces watched them go. "So it begins. So it begins," Leonidas agreed. The first Persian attack came the following dawn. Xerxes sent his Median infantry first. 20,000 soldiers commanded to sweep the Greeks from the pass through sheer momentum. They advanced in loose formation, confidence evident in their stride. Many carried wicker shields and light spears, armor minimal to maintain mobility. They hit the Spartan phalanx like water striking a cliff. The Spartans stood in 8 rows, shields overlapped to create a bronze wall, spears protruding through the gaps. When the Medes came within range, the Greeks didn't charge or break formation. They simply held, a living barrier of muscle and metal. Persian soldiers threw themselves against the shields, stabbing over the top, trying to hook weapons around the edges, pushing with all their strength. The phalanx didn't move. Leonidas fought in the front row, his spear thrusting and retracting with mechanical precision. Stab, withdraw, stab, withdraw. Beside him, Alpheus matched his rhythm. Behind them, replacements waited to step forward when front row fighters tired. The system worked with ruthless efficiency, fresh legs constantly rotating, no individual exhausted, the formation never breaking. The heat became unbearable. Sun reflecting off bronze armor, body heat from pressed-together soldiers, the furnace-like air trapped in the narrow pass. Sweat poured into eyes, stinging and blurring vision. Arms burned with fatigue, but the phalanx held. After 3 hours, the Medes withdrew, leaving hundreds of dead clogging the pass. Xerxes sent fresh troops, Scythians this time 10,000 strong. The pattern repeated, the phalanx held. By nightfall, the ground before the defensive wall had become a charnel house. Bodies lay 3 deep in places, blood turning the dust to mud. The Greeks had suffered losses. 43 dead, another 70 wounded seriously enough to withdraw from combat. But they'd slaughtered thousands, proving Leonidas's thesis. In a narrow pass, training and discipline trumped numbers. That night, Leonidas walked among his men as they tended wounds, ate meager rations, and tried to rest. He stopped at a cluster of wounded Spartans being treated by the expedition's 3 physicians, older men who'd seen too much battlefield trauma to be shocked by anything. One soldier, a veteran named Eurytus, had taken a Persian arrow through his left eye. The physician had removed the arrow and bandaged the socket, but infection was inevitable in this heat and filth. "Captain," Eurytus said weakly when he noticed Leonidas, "I can still fight. My right eye is fine." "You've done your part," Leonidas said gently. "Rest now." "No." Eurytus tried to sit up, grimacing with pain. "I marched here knowing the bargain. I don't get to leave early because of 1 arrow." Leonidas knelt beside him. "Eurytus, you have a wife and 3 children in Sparta. If you survive, if you can make it back—" "I didn't come here to survive," the soldier interrupted. We came to buy time with our lives. I'm not ready to stop paying that price yet. The physician caught Leonidas's eye and shook his head slightly. The wound was fatal, just not immediately. Eurytus would die here regardless, whether from infection or in battle. Tomorrow then, Leonidas conceded. If you can stand and hold a spear, you fight. Eurytus managed a pained smile. That's all I ask, Captain. Similar scenes played out across the camp. Men with broken ribs insisted on returning to formation. Soldiers with gashed legs demanded to be placed in the second or third row, where mobility mattered less. The Spartan obsession with honor and duty had created warriors who feared shame more than death. Alpheus found Leonidas near midnight as the captain stood alone on the defensive wall, looking north at the vast Persian camp. Scouts report movement in the hills, Alpheus said quietly. Local Trachinian guides have been seen near Xerxes' command tent. Leonidas's stomach tightened. The Anapeia path, a mountain goat trail that wound through the cliffs and emerged behind Greek positions. He'd posted guards there, but a skilled guide could show the Persians how to flank them. How long until they could complete the circuit? Leonidas asked. If they march tonight, they'll be in position by dawn. We'd be surrounded. This was the strategic reality Leonidas had anticipated but hoped to avoid. The pass at Thermopylae was only impregnable from the front. If the Persians found the mountain path, the entire defensive position collapsed. Wake the Phocian contingent, Leonidas ordered. Send them to guard the Anapeia path. 1,000 men should be able to hold that narrow trail. And if the Persians break through? Leonidas met his second's gaze. Then we've bought all the time we can. The mission becomes ensuring they pay the maximum price for every meter they advance. Alpheus nodded and moved to carry out the orders, but Leonidas called him back. Alpheus, when it's clear the position is lost, when the Persians flank us successfully, I'm going to order the allied contingents to retreat, the Thespians, Thebans, all the non-Spartans. There's no strategic value in everyone dying. And us? We stay. 300 Spartans holding to the last. That's the image that will resonate across Greece. That's the story that will inspire Athens and Corinth and all the city-states to unite. We become the symbol that holds the alliance together. A martyrdom operation, Alpheus said quietly. A necessary sacrifice, Leonidas corrected. We knew this from the beginning. Now we simply see it through to the end. Dawn brought the dreaded confirmation. A runner from the Phocian contingent arrived, blooded and breathless. 10,000 Persian immortals had used the Anapeia path during the night, guided by a traitorous local. The Phocians had been overwhelmed and scattered. The Greeks were now surrounded. Leonidas gathered his captains for what he knew would be their final council. The strategic situation has changed, he said without preamble. We're flanked. The Persians will attack from both directions. Our mission, buying time, is complete. Athens has had 6 days to evacuate. The Spartan army has completed the Carneia festival. We've achieved our objective. So we retreat? One captain asked hopefully. The allied contingents retreat, Leonidas clarified. They've fought honorably. There's no shame in survival when the mission is complete, but the 300 Spartans stay. Dinakes leaned forward. Why us? Why not everyone? Because Sparta's reputation is Greece's glue, Leonidas explained. Our reputation for never retreating, never surrendering, fighting to the last man, that's what holds the alliance together. If we run now, that reputation shatters. Athens will doubt us. Corinth will question our commitment. The alliance fractures before it truly forms. So we die for politics, another captain said bitterly. We die for Greece, Leonidas corrected firmly. We die so that 300 years from now, when people tell the story of how Greece defeated the Persian Empire, they'll remember Thermopylae. They'll remember that Spartans stood when everyone else would have run. That's not politics. That's legacy. The tent fell silent. Finally, Alpheus spoke. When do the others leave? Now. Immediately. Before the Persian trap closes completely. We'll hold both approaches long enough for them to escape south. One by one, the captains filed out to inform their men. Only Dieneces remained. My sons, he said quietly, they're only 12. They'll grow up without a father. They'll grow up free, Leonidas replied, in a Greece that exists because we stood here. And they'll know their father died with honor, completing his duty. That's not nothing, Dieneces. No, the veteran agreed. It's not nothing. The sun rose on the 7th day over a transformed battlefield. The Thespians had refused to retreat, 700 men choosing to stay and die alongside the Spartans. Leonidas had argued with Captain Demophilus for an hour, but the Thespian commander remained adamant. We came here for the same reason you did, Demophilus said stubbornly. Let us finish what we started. So 1,000 men prepared to face over 100,000, surrounded and trapped, with no hope of survival. The Allied contingents had escaped during the night, carrying news of the Spartan stand southward to Athens and beyond. That strategic objective was complete. Now came the final act. Xerxes attacked from both directions simultaneously. To the north, fresh Median infantry advanced in waves. To the south, the Immortals, Persia's elite guard, 10,000 strong, closed the trap. Between these converging forces, the Greeks formed two defensive positions. 300 Spartans holding the northern approach, 700 Thespians blocking the southern path. Leonidas fought in a haze of exhaustion and adrenaline. 6 days of continuous combat had reduced warfare to its most basic elements: stab, withdraw, step, shield up. His world shrank to the 3 meters in front of him, the bronze shield on his left arm, the spear in his right hand, and the soldiers pressing close on either side. The Persians had learned from their earlier failures. They sent waves of archers first, raining arrows into the tight Greek formations. Spartans locked shields overhead, creating a bronze roof, but arrows found gaps. Men screamed as iron points punched through leather and flesh. The phalanx grew ragged. Then came the infantry. Fresh and numerous, they crashed into the exhausted Greeks with renewed fury, sensing victory. The Spartans held, but their line compressed, forced back meter by meter, bodies piled so high that both sides struggled to maintain footing, fighting atop corpses and slick with blood. Leonidas saw Eurytus, the one-eyed soldier who'd insisted on fighting, take a spear thrust through his throat. The veteran collapsed without a sound, buried immediately under trampling feet. Beside him, Alpheus fought with mechanical precision until a Persian sword found the gap between his helmet and cuirass, nearly decapitating him. The formation was dissolving, not from cowardice or panic, but from simple mathematics. Too few Greeks, too many Persians, too much exhaustion. "Fall back to the hill!" Leonidas shouted, his voice hoarse from screaming orders all morning. "The hill!" The remaining Spartans, fewer than 100 now, retreated to a small rise behind the defensive wall, a position barely 20 meters wide. They formed a final circle, shields out, spears ready. The Thespians were already gone, overwhelmed by the Immortals hours ago. Now only Spartans remained. Persian soldiers surrounded them completely, a sea of humanity circling the small island of Greek resistance. For a moment, an eerie calm settled. Both sides paused, catching breath, assessing. The Spartans stood silent, armor dented and bloodied, faces grim but defiant. Xerxes himself appeared on the northern ridge, surrounded by his royal guard. Even from this distance, Leonidas could see the Persian king's ornate robes, his elevated platform, the parasols shading him from the sun. The King of Kings had come to witness the final moments personally. "Spartans!" Leonidas called out, turning to address his remaining men. "Today we complete our mission. Greece remembers us. Our families honor us. Our names become legend. A ragged cheer answered him, exhausted voices but unbroken spirits. The Persians attacked from all sides simultaneously. Arrows darkened the sky, thousands of shafts arcing down onto the small hilltop. Spartans fell by dozens, bronze armor useless against the sheer volume of projectiles. Leonidas felt an arrow punch into his left thigh, another graze his shoulder. Pain was irrelevant now. The spears broke or were torn from hands. The Spartans drew their short swords, Xyphos blades designed for close combat. When the Persian infantry rushed the hill, they met not a phalanx, but a desperate melee, man against man, blade against blade. Leonidas fought with the sword in his right hand and a broken spear shaft in his left, striking and blocking on pure instinct. A Persian soldier came at him from the side. Leonidas drove his sword through the man's stomach, withdrew it, turned to block another attack. Time lost meaning. There was only movement and violence. He saw Xerxes surrounded by 5 Persians. The veteran warrior killed 3 before they brought him down. Spartans were dying all around, their circles shrinking, pressed together so tightly that the dead couldn't fall, held upright by the press of living bodies. Leonidas took a spear thrust to his left side, feeling ribs crack. He staggered but stayed upright, supported by the soldiers around him. Another spear found his back, driving through a gap in his armor. His legs gave out. He fell to his knees, still swinging his sword weakly. "Forward!" he heard someone shout. Was it his voice? "For Sparta! For Greece!" Persian soldiers swarmed over the final cluster of defenders. Leonidas felt hands grabbing at him, pulling him down. He saw the sky above, surprisingly blue and clear. Then a shadow blocked the sun. A Persian officer raising a sword. The blade fell. Darkness. But the mission was complete. 3 weeks after Thermopylae, Athens received confirmation that every Spartan and Thespian who stood at the pass had died. Not one had surrendered. Not one had begged for mercy. They'd fought to the absolute last man, their bodies found piled on that small hill, surrounded by thousands of Persian dead. The news spread across Greece like wildfire. In the Athenian assembly, the politician Themistocles used the Spartan sacrifice to rally his city. "They bought us time with their blood," he thundered to the gathered citizens. "We dishonor their sacrifice if we don't use that time to fight. The Spartans showed us that Persians can bleed, can die, can be stopped by Greek courage and determination." The vote was unanimous. Athens would fight, not flee. In Sparta, Gorgo stood in the Agogge training grounds where her husband had stood just weeks before. The ephors had sent official word of Leonidas's death, delivered with military precision and no emotion. She'd received it with the same stoicism, though in private she'd allowed herself one night of tears. Now she watched her nephew, Leonidas's brother's son, barely 18, drill with other young warriors. The boy had his uncle's build, his determination. He'd want to avenge Thermopylae, she knew, as would every Spartan. The ephors had already mobilized the full army. Religious law no longer constrained them. 40,000 Spartan soldiers and perioikoi marched north, fury in their hearts and the memory of 300 martyrs driving them forward. At Thermopylae itself, Persian engineers worked to clear the pass of bodies so the massive army could continue south. The task took 4 days. That's how many corpses clogged the narrow space. Persian casualties numbered over 20,000, an astounding price for a pass that should have been swept clear in hours. Xerxes ordered the Greek dead beheaded and mutilated, trying to break Greek morale by displaying the corpses. The effort backfired. Instead of fear, the mutilations generated rage. Greek city-states that had remained neutral suddenly joined the alliance. The brutality reminded them what Persian mercy looked like. In the port of Salamis, the combined Greek fleet prepared for naval engagement. Over 300 triremes from Athens, Corinth, Aegina, and other city-states gathered, their bronze rams glistening. The captains looked at each other with new resolve. If 300 Spartans could hold 10,000 times their number, surely the Greek fleet could match the Persian navy. Admiral Eurybiades, a Spartan himself, addressed the assembled ship commanders. "Thermopylae taught us that numbers don't guarantee victory. Our strength is here," he struck his chest, "in our willingness to sacrifice for each other. Every Athenian trireme is now Leonidas's shield wall. Every Corinthian ship is Dienekes' spear. We are all Spartans today." The fleet moved to engage, inspired by dead men who'd shown them how to fight. 2 months after Thermopylae, the Persian army reached Athens. As Leonidas had predicted, the city was empty. The citizens had evacuated to Salamis and Troezen, taking their families and valuables. Xerxes burned the abandoned buildings, declaring victory even as Greek soldiers watched from ships offshore. Then the Greek fleet struck. In the narrow waters between Salamis and the mainland, the Persian navy found itself trapped much like their army had been at Thermopylae. The strait negated their numerical advantage. Greek triremes, built for maneuverability and ramming, tore through the Persian fleet with devastating efficiency. By sunset, 200 Persian ships were sunk or disabled. Xerxes, watching from shore, saw his invasion plans collapse. The King of Kings retreated to Persia, leaving behind a weakened occupation force that the now unified Greek army destroyed the following spring at Plataea. The Persian invasion was over. Greece remained free. Historians would debate for centuries whether Thermopylae was necessary. Some argued that the Spartans died needlessly, that the pass could have been abandoned without significant cost. Others recognized the strategic reality. Without those 7 days of delay, Athens couldn't have evacuated. The Greek alliance wouldn't have solidified, and the victories at Salamis and Plataea would never have occurred. But more than strategy, Thermopylae became a symbol. In the years that followed, when Greek city-states bickered and threatened to fracture, someone would always invoke the 300. They stood together. The argument went, can we do any less? In Sparta, they erected a simple stone marker at Thermopylae with words written by the poet Simonides. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." Not a boast, not a claim of heroism, just a statement of duty completed. Visited the memorial 10 years after the battle, an older woman now, her hair completely grey. She traced the carved letters with her fingers, remembering the morning Leonidas had fastened his armor, the conversation they'd had about death and duty. "You made it count," she whispered to the stone. "Every life worth 1,000 Persians, just as I asked." The wind off the gulf carried the sound of waves crashing against rocks, the same sound that had accompanied her husband's final stand. She stayed until sunset, then walked back to her camp, shoulders straight, head high. Her husband had died completing his mission. She would honor that by living hers, raising their surviving son to understand that some things were worth more than life itself. Duty, honor, Greece. The legacy of Thermopylae wasn't supernatural intervention or miraculous victory. It was simpler and more profound. The willingness of ordinary men to do extraordinary things when duty demanded it. To stand when logic said run, to fight when mathematics said surrender, to sacrifice everything so that others could live free. Leonidas and his 300 hadn't destroyed Xerxes' 100,000 in one afternoon. That was poetic exaggeration. But they'd shown Greece how to fight. They'd proven that courage and discipline could overcome overwhelming odds. They'd bought the time needed for democracy to survive. In the end, that was more than enough. Years later, when Alexander the Great marched east to conquer Persia, he stopped at Thermopylae first. He stood before the memorial stone and addressed his army. These men gave everything so Greece could be free. Now we march to ensure the entire world knows that sacrifice was not in vain. The 300 had died, but their mission, their sacrifice, had set in motion events that would shape civilization for millennia. Every free society that followed owed a debt to that small hill in a narrow pass, where Spartans learned that death with purpose was the highest form of life. Thermopylae wasn't a battle, it was a choice, and 300 men chose correctly.